all these albums that we've covered, and it's been almost like a whole entire like calendar. I think it's been a calendar year since we started recording, if I'm not mistaken, right?
It's pretty close.
Yeah. And I have a question for you though.
What's that?
Have you noticed in the last year how I've changed?
How you've changed? What do you mean?
Yeah, like sometimes I have done clunky intros with inserting random lyrics here, and now I've gotten a lot smoother.
Ah, yes. Yeah, you have gotten a lot smoother. You've gotten a lot smoother in that regard.
And welcome back, everybody, to the best music podcast on this side of the Mississippi, hosted by two dashingly good-looking men who share the same middle name. I am the one. I am the only. I am the never-disputed Ryan James Kearns.
And I am the one, the only, the often disputed Matthew James Durzick.
And if this is your very first time tuning into this podcast here, first of all, welcome. Second of all, it's called Hey, Listen to This. And what this podcast is all about is me and Matt just take turns, picking albums every week that we're going to dissect. It could be for various different reasons. It could be like, hey, this is a very popular album this year. Hey, this is a classic album that we've heard about in the past. Or, hey, this is an album that, we want to explore into, like, the genre that both me and Matt have never even touched before, like K-pop. And, we review albums track by track and given our various thoughts and opinions about it. And we, I have fun along the way. So, last week, we took our first step into the Jack White multiverse of the universe with the 2008 release by the Raconteurs called The Consolers of the Lonely. And for me, it was a great time revisiting that album because, it's an album that's been very unique within my own music listening history due to the fact that it seemed like a couple songs here or there kept coming back into my orbit for one reason or another. And, it was pretty cool checking out that album as a whole.
It really was. I'm glad you brought to my attention like you did, because I had known about one of the cuts off of there before, but there were a lot of good songs on that album. A couple I didn't really care for, but ultimately I thought it was a very solid album through and through. And will be interesting to see where we head next into the Jack White multiverse next week. But we got some business to take care of this week.
Some business about some turtles, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, we are talking about the band The Turtles this week. Not the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, not the State Center from Kentucky. No, the band The Turtles and their album The Turtles Present the Battle of the Bands from 1968, one that I have on vinyl. I actually have it right here. I know the listeners cannot see it, but Ryan can. And this album, before I get into the album, the Turtles themselves were a pop band from the 1960s, and anyone who has heard the song Happy Together, or a couple songs that we'll talk about off this album, or maybe She'd Rather Be With Me, that was them. By 1968, they were kind of feeling like they wanted to branch out in different directions. So this album is called The Turtles Present the Battle of the Bands because they decided, kind of, sort of, but not really, like the Beatles, that they wanted to try to branch out into different avenues. And so they decided to branch out and pretend to be different bands playing different songs like it was some sort of showcase. And I am curious as to what your thoughts are going to be on this album, because the second I recommend, I'm thinking, he's in for a real good time. He's going to be in for a cavalcade of chaos that he may not have experienced in any type of form before.
Whenever you brought this album up for our offering for the podcast here, that might be a poor choice of words, but hey, I'm going with it. Like, it kind of reminded me of like when you recommended albums in the past, like Jellyfish, like that Neil Young album, and even that Peter Gabriel album, albums that would never have crossed my path otherwise. I mean, obviously I've heard of Peter Gabriel and Neil Young, but before like this podcast I never heard of Jellyfish. And I was kind of like, a little bit aware of what the Turtles were doing. In my head, I might have switched them up with another band called Trampled by Turtles, which, I mean, who knows that we can, cover that band here sometime soon. Spoiler alert, we're not going to touch that band unless I get morbidly curious. However, after spinning this album a couple of times and hearing about like their more popular tracks like Happy Together, I instantly knew, oh hey, yeah, this is what the Turtles are. And yeah, this album is incredibly unique, and I'm glad that you mentioned the whole them approaching several different tracks as these metaphorical bands, because like when I was on Wikipedia, I noticed, and I don't know if you have this on the vinyl back cover there, but they labeled each track here as like, hey, this is the band that they're trying to the artificial band that they are trying to pass off as. But yeah, incredibly unique experience for me that I'm very happy to discuss. But yeah, once again, I'm looking forward to diving deep into an album that I've never even heard of. But I'm here all for it, and this is the purpose of our show, my dude.
It is absolutely the purpose of it, and I say we go ahead and dive right into it, starting with the more or less title track of the album, which is the Battle of the Bands, in which the band is dressing up as the U.S. Teens featuring Raul. Why? I don't know. But the point of this song is basically to serve as basically a general opening to this album, and it does a really good job, I think, of it, because listening to it, it just sounds like a fun, weird, like TV show theme for any type of like major music showcase, something like American Bandstand or Ready Steady Go or Top of the Pops, something along those lines. And the lyrics to this song, which were written by Chip Douglas, who produced this album, and Harry Nilsson, of all people, are pretty sardonic, because it feels like this band is just going out there and say, hey, this is one of those deals where, people are lining up to see the Battle of Bands, and, everyone's looking for the hot new thing, and, guys are looking in the audience for the hot new thing. It's a very cynical exercise, and I mean that as a compliment. This did not land in my top 3, but for the record, I do have a top 3, and I do not have a bottom anything.
Is that some epic foreshadowing? I mean, who knows?
Yeah, maybe.
So, before I even get into my thoughts and feelings about the opening track here, I do believe I'm reviewing right now. I definitely have a top 3, and I have some. Yep, I have a bottom 3 as well. So once we, like we do, once we come across those tracks, I'll give my reasoning for them. Let's begin with the Battle of the Bands, which is a track that does not land in either of my top 3 or my bottom 3. And, I'm right there with you, where it just seems like, the lyrics were just really, really setting up the scene for the concept of this album. And yeah, just a super tight opening track here. It kind of reminded me of like the intro to like Sgt. Pepper's from the Beatles, not exactly in terms of like tempo and like musicality, but like its intended purpose. And here I love how the horns are sounding. I'm me, I'm always a huge sucker, especially when I I thought I heard a Barry sax in this song, and that speaks my love language because I'm a fellow Barry sax player. And overall the outro I felt like was pretty cool. Like you got that brief cutout at the end where like it just seems like the band is jamming, and yeah, there's not much else I can say about this track here specifically. Sets the scene appropriately, gets the listener hyped, and they can picture in their head like this metaphorical band battle of the bands, and yeah, it does its intended purpose well. Maybe if like if there was like maybe a standout moment or two, like this could have popped into my top three, but overall super solid song.
Wholeheartedly agree, and I'm glad you mentioned the fact the band does sound tight, because for the majority of this record I think that's a pretty key element, is the fact that they do sound tight, and again they are locked into whatever mode it is they're in, even if the modes themselves are not necessarily meant to be locked into, like the next track on this album, which is The Last Thing I Remember.
So the next track is The Last Thing I Remember, and yeah, this is a pretty interesting track, dude. Like, it took me a second to really, like, because obviously the instant comparable sonic-wise that I was able to, like, in terms of band for band here, especially with this track, was the Beatles. And I was just like, okay, so when was this released? And, like, when was Sgt. Pepper released? Because, like, that I would consider that to be, like, one of the most psychedelic albums of all time. And, like, Sgt. Pepper was released in 1967. So, the Turtles probably influenced by that sound. And probably a lot of bands around that time were heavily influenced by that sound. Because, hell, everybody discovered what, like, LSD was and what drugs were. And they wanted to write, like, their experiences going through trips of, like, experiencing drugs and everything like that. However, this song's fine, man. Like, I like it a little less than the Battle of the Bands, only because, like, I feel like it's a little bit one note. I mean, the vocal harmonies here are super tight, and like I like how they play with tensions at the ends of phrases. Lyrics are not really anything to write home about, and like it just, I feel like with this track here, it's more about how the band is playing with the song and the like sonic textures more than anything, which is still like impressive feat in my mind. However, super decent track, but a little bit like one step down from the Battle of the Bands.
I'm pretty much right there with you. I don't think this track's that bad either. I will say the one nitpick I do have about it is those harmonies, particularly at the ends of the phrases, like you say. Like, I think the high-end harmonies, like the high pitches of vocals here, are a little on the grating side, and it does feel like the band's trying to a little too hard, but at the same time, for an album of this sort of self-parody, that's kind of the point. You got to find that sort of edge of comedy where, you're able to tell the joke and let everybody know that's a joke, but not so much that it's comes off unprofessional or like you have no idea what the hell you're talking about. And this really does hit that sweet spot of parodying psychedelia while also, like you say, having a lot of good solid sonic textures in there. And I agree with you, the lyrics are not really anything to write home about. It is a slight step down from the Battle of the Bands, but not too bad that I had to put it anywhere near a bottom thing.
One other note here that I want to add with The Last Thing I Remember, specifically with the lyrics, like, if the Turtles were trying to embody this sound and, like, various different, like, genres, like, throughout the rest of the album here, like, with this track here, maybe they wanted to purposefully keep the lyrics at that surface level, like, in terms of, like, style, because maybe, like, this kind of track is just like, hey, we can do this, but it's almost like a parody of the genre. Maybe I might be looking a little bit too far into it, but, at least it's my opinion. And one other note here is that the band that they're playing as for this track is the Atomic Enchilada, which is not my nickname from high school.
Right. No, although we may have had a couple of Atomic Enchiladas in college. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was going to mention that if you didn't. And the next band with the next song is Howie, Mark, Johnny, Jim, and Al, which are the first names of each of the members of the Turtles, and the song Elenore. Now, this song pretty much encapsulates the entirety of the album in one full felt swoop, because a little bit of backstory behind this song. So as we had mentioned, the Turtles hit a #1 hit with Happy Together, and their label, White Whale, wanted them to come up with another one. They didn't want to. So what they did, essentially, was make a parody of themselves and putting out this song, and it's really just one of the best self-parodying songs of all time. It really is. Like, they just decided, okay, we're going to come up with this song that's basically Happy Together without any legitimate professionalism. And you could hear it in the lyrics, especially on the chorus where it's saying, you're my pride and joy, etc. Like, that is such a cynical take on how to compliment anybody, especially your significant other. These guys know exactly what they are doing with this song. And the weird irony of it is that it did, in fact, become a hit. It hit #6 on the Hot 100. And it is so well produced. It is so well executed. The way the chorus just pops off. Johnny Barbata, who's the drummer for the Turtles on this album, the way he rips those triplets heading into the chorus is perfect. And I'm just going to come out and say, this is my favorite song on the album. Not even close. It is that good.
Well, this is a bit awkward.
Uh-oh. Don't tell me.
I'm right there with you, man.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay. I got scared for a second. I was like, you are not making this your least favorite track on the album. Jesus.
You are about to be fired from the show if you say this is your least favorite track. No, dude, this is my favorite track on the album as well. Like, a lot of the notes that you hit on is what I absolutely agree with, especially with the fact that they were able to, the simple fact that this is a parody song and they execute it so well within the song structures of the time and the almost kind of, like you alluded to, the backhanded love lyrics that they drench throughout this track here. One set of lyrics here that I want to highlight is, Elenore, can I take the time to ask you to speak your mind? Tell me that you love me better. And, with my woke mind virus, as Elon Musk might say, I would say, love isn't really about, hey, tell me I'm pretty. It's more about being there as an emotional support for the other person. So, seeing that set of lyrics, and, the Turtles might have been, they might have been infected with the woke mind virus that I spoke of back in the 60s, but it almost seems like I might be reading a little bit too far into it, but I absolutely love that set of lyrics. And those set of lyrics that you mentioned, you're my pride and joy, etc., fantastic. Backhanded set of lyrics. It kind of reminds me of a modern day. It reminds me of Father John Misty. I don't know if you ever listened to any of his stuff.
No.
So, side note, I highly recommend it. The album that I would recommend for you to check out would be I Love You, Honey Bear. I feel like you would appreciate it. If you definitely appreciate this track here. But overall, even outside of the lyrical standpoint, I love the dynamic diversity, because you get the kind of I don't want to say like chill verses, but then the chorus is just so big and almost obnoxious. But in terms of like what they're bringing to the table, you never can really go overboard with it. And yeah, man, like I love this song to I love this song. It's not a perfect song in my opinion, but you know it's really fantastic though.
It really is, and I'll kind of agree. It isn't perfect in and of itself, but it's perfect for this album, and it's perfect for the message that this band is trying to send, which is, hey, we're really good at what we do, but we don't have to take ourselves seriously, and that's what I think makes this song the centerpiece of this album.
So, pivoting over to Too Much Heartsick Feeling. So, we went from, like, you know, the Battle of the Bands, which is, like, you know, 60s rock of the time, and then you get The Last Thing I Remember, which is, like, very much psychedelia, Elenore, which is, like, you know, almost parodying, like, well, it is parodying the group. And now we kind of get into, like, you know, a stylistic shift with this track. Like, the band that is being, you know, represented it, or who's, like, you know, supposed to be performing this song, is the Quad City Ramblers. And with this track here, we get more of a country western vibe to it, and it's pretty cool. Like, you know, the band's able to, like, you know, mess with the sound pretty well. I do like the background vocals in this track here. It's super tight. And I love the, like, again, the old school blues country feel that you get with this track. I mean, the lyrics aren't really much to write home about, even from a parody standpoint, to be honest with you, dude. Like, you get lyrics like, honey, I want you, oh, I believe that you want me to, oh, oh, oh. And it's really a shame that after all this time, we drifted so far apart. I mean, overall, like, I still dig it, even from like a parody, or, like, you know, hey, like, they're just trying something different. But not enough stand-outish moments to pop it into my top three. But, you know, it's a decent enough track that keeps that on my bottom three.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you on this one as well. I really dig the way that Jim Pons, who is the guitarist for this band, or one of them, really just utters those low notes, because he's the lead singer on this particular track, and he does a really good job of bringing that out. And I agree that the harmonies are solid. Again, the execution by the band, like, you would think that this legitimately is a different band playing this. Like, this can't possibly be the band that just played Elenore. It can't be, but it is. And they do a really good job of going into country mode here. But you're right. Aside from just the overall vibe of that, there really isn't a whole lot to write home about. The lyrics are pretty much as standard as they can be. I do kind of like the opening, where it sounds like they're in a saloon, where everybody's, you know, like, whooping and hollering as this guy's about to sing about, you know, how heartbroken he is. You know, that's a nice touch. Not in my top three either, but I really do like this track.
And there's something to be said about how the band's able to, like, you know, I don't want to say skirt on the surface of this kind of music here. However, like, it almost seems like they're, with this album here, like, they're almost like a chameleon when it comes to, like, you know, just shifting into different kind of sonic textures. It's a pretty cool trick that they're able to do, and it makes the album for a little bit more of an enjoyable listen, in my opinion.
Agreed. It's almost like the musical equivalent of Mariah Carey whenever she does a show and she changes into like 9,000 different costumes. This feels like the musical equivalent of that.
So, you ready to pivot over to the next track?
The next track is Oh Daddy, and like I said, I don't have a bottom three on this album, or a bottom anything, but if there was one track that I kind of didn't really dig quite as much, this would be it. It's really well produced, and the band sounds good. The music sounds good, and the lyrics I think are pretty good too. I mean, the lyrics do a pretty good job of setting the scene about this guy who, is trying to admit that he's innocent and, sort of wondering what it is that, he's in trouble for, and trying to admit to, his daddy or, whatever that case may be. I mean, this was written in 1968. Daddy in 2024 can mean a number of things. But the point being, the one real nitpick I have about this track is that I really don't get what it is they're trying to parody. Because, like, on the one hand, it sounds kind of like a little country-ish, especially coming after the last track. But after the second listen, I'm thinking, is this a take on the Kinks? Because it does kind of have that sort of jaunty, sort of sardonic look at living life and, wondering, if I'm going to school, what would they think of me? But again, it doesn't really land as far as what it is. But it's so well produced and performed that I can't put it at the bottom or, like, put that scarlet letter of this song bad on there. But at the same time, I say out of all the parody tracks on this album, this has the least amount of it.
Yeah, I'm right there with you in terms of, like, the lack of parody with this track here. I mean, I did dig it a good bit. Like, one thing, like, that I'm just going to highlight that, because I don't want to steal too much of your thunder, is just I like the bass line in this track here specifically. Like, it's a really great performance. It's super solid. And the change up at the end where the vocals get more frantic and, like, the lyrics, like, just change up are a super nice touch. And the moment that I'm referencing, the lyrics read, well, I may be through with classes. I'm ashamed. Yeah, that I've scandalized, publicized. I'm mad. No. Have you noticed in the last year how I've changed? And it just, like, it gets more frantic after that. Overall, pretty decent track. Again, like, not much here for me to dive into. I mean, the biggest thing that I walked away with this track here is that the bass part was super solid. I did appreciate the running bass line throughout it. And just the frantic nature of how the vocals change up, along with the other stuff that you touched on. But overall, decent track. Again, not in my bottom three. And we're about, like, halfway through the album. Like, it's going to be kind of curious to see, like, what my bottom three is. I mean, I'm kind of teasing it, but for completionist's sake, though, with O'Daddy, the band that performs this track here is the LA Bust 66.
Yeah, and with a name like that, I feel like they were trying to pivot more towards, like, again, sort of like a outlaw country-ish type of vibe, which is why I can't really say that they're trying to parody the Kinks. But at the same time, it sounds like the Kinks, so I'm just going off of what I know. And speaking of which, we're heading to the end of side A on this record with the song Buzzsaw. And Ryan, go ahead.
So, this song here, it's an interesting way for things to wrap up in terms of, like, side A of the record, because, it almost seems like it's a cool down, especially with how, like, the track literally ends lyrically, where they're talking about, like, listen, we're gonna take 5 now, pause for the cause, we'll be right back, and then sign a record with Howie, Mark, John, Jim, and Al, sucking it to ya. And, like, it really adds to the album's narrative. And yeah, this song just grooves, and it's just a groove kind of track. The organ that's playing, that is being played, is doing a great job laying down the foundation for the track. And the word buzzsaw lyric is being delivered fairly decently. But, like, I'm going to be honest with you, this is a little bit of a nothing burger, because, like, yeah, you're playing into the narrative and the groove is super tight, and it really doesn't do much for me. And this did land in my bottom three at number 3. and for a very specific reason. I don't think it's a bad track by any means. It's just a whole bunch of nothing, to be frankly honest with you. Catch me on a different day, and it could pop out of my bottom three, and my bottom three could just become a bottom two. But, overall, though, like, this is just... It's a song that's just kind of there, and I know that we've mentioned like a couple other tracks on this album so far. They're just kind of there, but this is a nothing burger, my good sir.
I get where you're coming from, and I don't completely disagree. It didn't land in my top three whatsoever, but at the same time, I do want to highlight the one note that you did not catch on, and I forgive you for not catching on. So sonically, I mean, lyrically, you're right. There's nothing there. It is basically a cool down instrumental type of song. But as far as we're talking about parody, this is such a dead on accurate take of what the earliest type of heavy metal sounded like. Like if you're talking like early Deep Purple, Iron Butterfly, Vanilla Fudge, like I'll even throw Cream in there in a sense, like sort of like heavy organ bass, just sort of this sludgy, slow beat. Like, I have a hard time believing that they didn't think about those kinds of bands whenever they made this track. Because again, it's such a perfect like take on those kinds of sludgy, slow, let's cover, a Supremes hit at, 33 and a third by playing, the 45 at 33 and a third. Which, by the way, for those of you who don't know the story, Vanilla Fudge actually did that. They practiced You Keep Me Hanging On and covered it by taking the 45 and slowing it down and just saying, all right, we'll do that. But side note aside. Yeah, I like this track quite a bit, but I understand why you don't like it as much, because if you don't have that knowledge of early 60s heavy metal, like pre-Zeppelin, pre-Black Sabbath, you're not going to get the joke. And if, for any audience, like especially a pop audience, at that time, they may not get the joke either. But yeah, there's really not much to say about the song other than that. The groove's fine. The lyrics are not there at all. And it just kind of goes in and out. But yeah, that's my thoughts about Buzzsaw.
And this is why, I appreciate you as a co-host, because you bring that knowledge, you fill in that knowledge gap musically that I didn't have, and it might bump this out of my bottom three, and I'm still 50-50 on it, but for the purposes of the review here, I'm locking it in bottom three at 3. And also for completionist sake, the band that is performing Buzzsaw is the Fabulous Dogs. So yeah, I appreciate that little tidbit, sir. So before we pivot over to side B of the record and talk about Surfer Dan, I'm gonna take a moment to plug some stuff here. Dear listener, if you were enjoying this episode of Hey Listen to This, the best way that you can show support to me and Matt here is by, on that podcasting platform that you're currently listening to us on. Give us a positive rating. Do whatever action that you need to do to stay up to date with our episodes. And yeah, if you are curious, we have social media links in the episode description down below. And also, just make sure that you comment your thoughts and feelings about the review. And if you've checked out this album, or if you are checking out this album specifically because we're covering it, which would be pretty cool. And yeah, that is pretty much it. If you have an episode recommendation, just make sure that you send us a email at tthheylisten@gmail.com. And without any more hesitation, we can talk about Surfer Dan. So, yeah, Surfer Dan, my dude.
Surfer Dan. And I'll just cut right to it now. The band, quote unquote, that's doing this song is called The Crossfires, which is actually I believe the name of the band that the Turtles used to be, or one of their first names before they made it big, back in the early 60s when surf music was the big thing. And lo and behold, this track is a full-blown surf rock song. And a really, really well-executed and good one at that. The first time I heard this song, I was knocked out by it. Because it is such a, once again, dead-on accurate type of vibe with the drums being what they are, the hand claps being where they are, the guitars sounding like they do, the little intro with the motorcycle going. And also, too, for as well executed as it is, it again manages to be a good source of parody, too. The lyrics, I think, are some of the funniest on the entire record, where they're talking about, he's so ripped you can't see him go by. References to the Maharishi. Like, it is such a deadpan accurate encapsulation of surf era rock. And I will, peek behind the curtain a little bit. Back when I used to work at Beaver County Radio, and we would do our car cruises, I would try to sneak this in as much as possible because it just fits right in so well, surf song wise. So yeah, I really like this song a lot, so much so that I have it at number 2 in my top 3.
I could have put this in my top 3 tracks, but it just missed the cut because, when I get to the other 2 favorite tracks, I'll obviously state my case. However, I'm right there with you. My thoughts and feelings about this track here specifically, like, immediately whenever this track came on, I'm like, oh, so they're making fun of the Beach Boys, or they're emulating the Beach Boys. And just for contextual sake, I know Pet Sounds wasn't really so much into, like, the surfing culture in terms of, like, music-wise. So I was thinking, like, okay, I don't know that much Beach Boys. What album can I reference here? Well, the album that I said, oh, hey, like, around, like, this time, like, the Turtles probably pulled from this album here. I don't want to say specifically, but, like, it was the most Beach Boys surfing album that I can think of, and that is Surfing USA, released in 1966. And I grew up listening to the Beach Boys a little bit, thanks to, like, relatives that would, like, have greatest hits compilations and, like, just have, like, even, like, Surfing USA as an album on CD in the car. So I'm kind of familiar with their work, and it's funny, like, whenever people talk about the Beach Boys, they reference mostly Pet Sounds, but now I'm like, wait, my brain automatically goes to literally that they are Beach Boys and they are surfing. So, switching over to Surfer Dan, though, like, I can't really cover too much more other than what you've already covered, like the lyrics. They really rip into surfing culture. You've already covered the lyrics that I wanted to touch on. And just I'm taken back by the performances with this track here specifically because everything's so tight, and the way that the band just emulates the sound of the Beach Boys and, like, the surfing culture, it's just so good. And maybe Catch Me on Another Day, and this song could have pop into my top 3. But, it still stands as a pretty amazing track that maybe a lot of people aren't aware of unless you're familiar with this album, which, cool. I'm glad that we're doing it justice for you by talking about how well Surfer Dan rules.
Yeah, no, it really does. And once again, I think one of the keys here is that, much like Elenore, the band isn't just parodying, a sound of the times, but they're also sort of parodying themselves, which I think gives them an edge in understanding what it is they need to do. So it's just like, oh, we've done this before, we're just going to make it funny. And they, again, execute that perfectly. So, yeah, no, I really like this track. Moving on, pivoting hard from the Crossfires and Surfer Dan to the band Chief Kamanawanalea and the Royal Macadamia Nuts with their song, I'm Chief Kamanawanalea, we're the Royal Macadamia Nuts. Ryan?
this track is... Oh, I mean, I understand what they were going for, maybe with this track here. Maybe they just wanted to have fun, which, you know me, I'm all about fun. I mean, I made an Elon Musk joke, and I joked about the woke mind virus already in this review here, and even previous reviews I've joked about Joe Biden. However, like, this track is literally just a simple drum beat with the vocals saying the title of the track for the majority of the runtime. And that's it. Like, unlike Buzzsaw, where you can kind of get into the groove, and maybe you're going to be able to fill in a knowledge gap that I'm missing with on Chief Kamanawanalea. Wow, apparently I'm a royal macadamia nut because I can't, that just doesn't roll off the tongue organically. Like, after a while, just the chimes of the title of the track, this is probably, I don't want to say this is like what I'm going to hear whenever I get tortured one day, because, inevitably the stalker that has been following me all my life that I haven't been able to see is probably going to catch up to me and torture me, because maybe they're listening to this podcast. Hey, if you're listening, stalker, shout out. I mean, I hope you're having a good time. But nonetheless, dude, like, you probably were able to tell, like, this is my least favorite song on the album. This song sucks. Well, I don't want to say it sucks. It's just not good. Like, if maybe they changed up, the vocals and lyrics, it might be a little bit different. But no, I can't. Catch me on any day, and I can't stand this song.
Okay, I get where you're coming from, and there's some points I do agree with. So for the record, the title of the song, Chief Kamanawanalea, is actually a pun, because according to whatever liner notes I've read about this song, whatever song facts I've seen, the name Kamanawanalea is supposed to be referenced as "Come on, I want to lay ya." So basically saying, hey, I want to bang you. That being said, that's literally it. That's literally the joke. There is nothing else aside from that. And why the backup band is Royal Macadamia Nuts, I have no idea. Whatever. So I will agree with you on that. That being said, I like this song purely for the groove, which I actually think is a little better than Buzzsaw, because once again, much like Elenore, Johnny Barbata's drums are perfect. Like, I understand, like, the whole, like from a parody standpoint, this song is not great, but from a just pure aural standpoint, that groove is so deep. It is executed perfectly, and it just, it doesn't really vibe with the sort of island Hawaiian sort of jungle tone they were going for, but the beat is so good. And fun fact, this song, because of its sort of funky beat, has actually been sampled in hip-hop a lot. Like, it has been sampled by the likes of A Tribe Called Quest and Drake. Like, it has found a place in hip-hop for a while. Like, this is one of those songs kind of like James Brown's Funky Drummer or Amen Brother by the Winstons, where it has been sampled a bunch of freaking times in hip-hop. So I think that alone is worthy of some sort of praise. But for the purposes of this album, no, you're pretty much dead on. It is one joke, maybe not even a full joke, like a half joke. It doesn't land that well, but just sonically it's so good that I can't really put it in a negative connotation.
I'm almost tempted to bump the song down just one peg, because that joke is just so bad. Like, come on, dude.
You already have it as the least favorite song of the album. You're gonna bump it down one more?
Like, well, at least, like, score-wise, it might bring down the album a little bit, which,
okay.
I'm not changing my score of the album. I have it locked in, and I stand by it. And again, I'm not taking anything away from, like, the drum beat. Like, it is pretty solid. But just the I'm Chief Kamanawanalea and we're the Royal Macadamia Nuts, like, that drove me literally insane. Like, it almost, like, for fans of our show, like, we often talk about, like, songs that you get that one noise, one part of a song, and you just, for some reason, like, you latch onto it, and it just drives you insane. For Matt, it is Charmer by Kings of Leon with the, like, squelch vocals. For me, it is... I don't know specifically one track that I can mention off of the Public Enemy episode, but like the sirens and the squeals, like they that drove me insane. So considering that we often have like I don't want to say, well, we have like these different moments in reviews. This is the best comparison I can make.
Wow. That, what's funny is that, I respect your opinion. I just find it funny that it's for a song that doesn't have any like squeals or horns. It's, pretty much delivered just sort of as its own thing. But that it was it's weird because the vocals are kind of snobby in a sense. Like, again, I think they're trying a little too hard with this joke because they really don't have a lot there. So because they don't have a lot, they have to sell it a little harder, and it kind of, doesn't come off right. But again, those drums are so good that I can't really say that this is a bad track.
So, you ready to pivot over to You Showed Me?
You Showed Me. Now, this is one of two songs on the album, this and The Battle of the Band itself, that was not written by the band itself. This was actually written by members of the Byrds, particularly singer Gene Clark and singer-guitarist Roger McGuinn. The band that the Turtles are parodying here or performing as is Nature's Children, but as the actual Turtles, they got credit for this song being a hit. It also hit number 6 on the top 10. Now, the one slight nitpick I have with this song is that I don't really know what the joke is, if there is any, because this sounds way too much like a straightforward pop song for there to be any sort of parody involved. And granted, probably a lot of that is due to hindsight, because if you've listened to oldies radio, particularly back in like the late 90s, early aughts, you've probably heard this song once or twice or 50 times. And really, there's a good reason for it. It's just a good-ass pop song. Like, I really do dig the way that the band sings the chorus of, you showed me how to do exactly what you do. And especially at the end of the song where they sort of go in this round where at the very end it sort of flows right into the next line. Like, I think that's probably the highlight of the song. And it's, again, joke-wise, there really isn't any, but I don't care. I have it at number 3.
Well, this is kind of awkward.
What is it now?
So, I don't have it at number 3. It's my second favorite track on the album.
Nice.
So, one note that I'm going to throw at, for, like, just a little bit of a history with this track here, this cover. So, the way that this cover came to be is that, one of the bandmates was playing this on a harmonium, with a broken bellows, and it required him to play the song slowly, and the slower tempo impressed the other members of the band, and thus, like, the Turtles actually recorded the song using the slower arrangement. And yeah, this became alongside Happy Together are probably the two most well-known Turtle songs that I know of, to be honest with you. And yeah, this song rules, and I love how smooth the vocals are. Like, it's a nice come down, and it could have been like, you swap this out with like Buzzsaw at the end as like a way to like, bring everything down to another level, and then you flip over the record with Surfer Dan. Maybe sequencing could have, like, made it a little bit better, and maybe, like, if you just excluded Buzzsaw as a whole, maybe the album could have got a little bit better. However, going over to You Showed Me, like, just this whole track is just smooth as butter. I don't really have that much else to say about it that you haven't already covered. The song just simply rules, and, like, I'm glad that whenever we do reviews like this and I'm able to, like, pinpoint, oh, hey, yeah, this is that band that does that song, because, like, this was definitely a moment for me, and I absolutely loved it, dude.
I'm glad you did, man. And yeah, this song is just a good song. Again, I don't really think, part of me wants to say that they didn't intend for this song to be part of this album. Like, they were just going to release this as a single, and they were just like, let's just fit it on the album anyway. Like, we like the song, we're just going to fit it in here somewhere. And then, I guess if there was a parody, maybe like Psychedelia again, because as we'll get to, it's not the last time they sort of take routes with the same genre twice over. But yeah, whether if you're rating this based on parody, this is a great song. But if you're just rating based on good songs, this is a really good song, and I have it at number 3, and you have it at number 2, and for good reason.
So, the next track is Food.
The next track is Food. Now, this song, again, I really don't know where to even begin with this song. It's performed by the quote-unquote Big Brothers, B-I-G-G. So I guess they were very futuristic in putting double letters at the end of words like we do with thick. But the song itself, it reminded me quite a bit of Frank Zappa, in a sense, like a very sort of weird, shape-shifting song throughout. And genre-wise, I can't really pin it down. Like, I can't tell if this is like pop or country. It has a little bit of a jazz feel on the verses. I would have to imagine that Zappa had some sort of influence on this song. I'm not sure what other band would qualify in that regard. Maybe the Beatles, probably not the Stones, definitely not the Who, or maybe the Kinks. I don't know. That being said, the lyrics of this song are basically, for the first 2 verses, basically them just listing off a bunch of different types of food. And then they pivot into another part of the song, sort of the second part, where they basically give a recipe for pot brownies. And going back to this song after several years, I'm stunned at how blatant it is. Like, they just outright say it's pot. Like, it's just pot right in the recipe for these brownies. Like, you guys are not hiding anything at this point. Like, you guys are just blatantly saying, yeah, this is a recipe for weed brownies. Have fun, kids. Aside from that, though, the lyrics are fine. The performance is well executed. Not really an outstanding track for me. It was a little too on the weird, a little too on the nose side. It's a fine song, but it did not land in my top 3.
I kind of have, like, similar thoughts and feelings with Food here. Like, I was definitely taken away by just the verses where you get that swinging, like, almost like a nursery school rhyme where, like, they're just listing off literally just different types of food, like you mentioned. And I really did dig the slowdown where they're talking about, baking these pot brownies, and especially with how the vocals sound, and 2 cups of butter, it almost seems like they want to have relations with that butter. But yeah, other than that, I mean, the ending is kind of funny, where it's just like, oh, we should check on those brownies now. I think they might be done. Oh, yeah, I don't know. I think I would have to revisit the track to make this statement fairly accurate, but I feel like in this album here, there was a track in a moment specifically, and I think this is it, where for those of you who have seen Sleepaway Camp, you might, understand what I'm coming at with this. The way that Aunt Martha, speaks and delivers lines. Like I feel like the band kind of emulates that. Again, Sleepaway Camp, decades after the release of this album here specifically, but it was just it was an interesting moment that I caught. But overall though, I really can't sink my teeth into this track here fully. It's not a bad track, but it still didn't do enough, and it was just the weirdness enough didn't carry it outside of my bottom three, and I have it at number 2 on my bottom 3 on this album.
I respect that, because you're right. They're really the what makes the great tracks great, aside from You Show Me, which is just a great track in and of itself. What made Surfer Dan and Elenore so great is that there's enough of a joke for you to get it, but it's also sort of, you have to think about it in order to get the joke. Here, they spell it out for you. There's nothing to think about. It's a song about pot brownies. That's literally the joke. And it's not a terrible joke, but it is just sort of, there. And it's an interesting comparison that you made with Aunt Martha, because that's kind of, and again, nothing against Sleepaway Camp, 10 out of 10, no notes. But the joke with Aunt Martha is that she's weird and eccentric, and they really don't expound on that. Whereas the joke with this is that, we're making pot brownies. How many pot brownies? I believe there's a whole bag. But at the same time, again, it's a one-note joke. I didn't hate it enough to put it in a bottom 3, but if I was really being nitpicky, it probably would have landed there.
So let me be perfectly clear. I don't hate this track. It just it kind of is a little bit weaker in comparison to a couple of the other tracks on the album. But even with it standing on its own, it's still not a bad track. The only track here I specifically just hate is that Torture song that I'm not even gonna mention. So yeah. Overall, though, a decent enough track, but doesn't do enough to crawl out of the basement of the tracks for me. So, moving on to Chicken Little Was Right. And so with this track here, we go back into that little country twang, in terms of what the band's able to bring to the table. And the band here that the Turtles are trying to say that is producing this song is called Fats, Mallard, and the Bluegrass Fireball. And I do dig this track a good bit. The way that the country twang infuses with just how bluegrassy it is, and how those vocals soar at the ends of phrases, it's a really nice touch. And also within the track, I like where the vocals layer on top of each other. As one phrase ends, the other begins. It's a solid touch. The band's performance is really tight here, and I feel like that's a common thread for the majority of the tracks in the album, where the band is really doing a lot to dabble into all these kind of different genres. It speaks to the musicality and the chops that the group has. Vocals on the chorus are really nice, especially with how the harmonies land. And I do love how the band kicks off the track with essentially, which is a thesis statement, which is, did you hear what happened to the world 2 days? Somebody came and took it away, wrapped it up in a wire net, and took it away, and it ain't back yet. And it kind of plays with the idea of hey, this is a bluegrass country kind of thing. Talk about a wire net, and remember Chicken Little, that story where it was saying Chicken Little was saying the sky is falling. This is kind of playing off the themes of that. Overall, decent enough track for me. Did not land in. It wasn't my third favorite track on the album. I mean, for those of you who can math and like are following along at home on the track listing, you can probably figure out what my third favorite track is at this point. But overall, I dug this track.
I did too. I will say lyrically there isn't a whole lot there. Although it is kind of interesting to hear, again, the sort of doomsday-esque lyrics delivered so jovially. A song that kind of reminds me of, ironically enough, from a couple years down the line is Delta Dawn, first recorded by Tanya Tucker, then made into a hit by Helen Reddy. Sort of that sort of weird, sort of Southern Gothic type of vibe, where, the music is upbeat, but the lyrics are very much not. Bobby Gentry's Ode to Billy Joe I would throw in there too. Also Her Fancy, which Reba McEntire covered. And there were a lot of country songs around this time that sort of delved into that chaotic, like, storyteller mode, that, showcased bleak times and conflicts in a weird, upbeat way. And I think that's kind of what the band was going for here. Maybe they were just kind of doing their own thing with bluegrass. It's a very easygoing song. It's very well executed, like you said. The band is showing off their chops. Ultimately, though, it did not stand out for me. It did not land in my top three, obviously, since we already explained what those top three songs were. But yeah, no, I dig this track too.
So, you ready to finish her off with Earth Anthem?
Yes, Earth Anthem is the final track on this album, and according to the sleeve of the, pretty much according to anything involving this album, the indication is that the entirety of the bands are singing this, which is a flat lie because there's only a few songs, or excuse me, a few vocals on this track. But man, what a pretty track it is. That flugelhorn that is heard throughout the start of the track and pretty much does a majority of the work melody-wise is so nice. And the harmonies on this song are really, really, really good. Like, execution-wise, this is probably one of the best songs on the album by far. And fun fact, this track was actually recorded by candlelight at 3 a.m. because the band was so hell-bent on making this sound as earnest as it possibly could. And I think they succeeded in that regard. Now, why is it not my top three? Well, ultimately, I don't think there's a whole lot there lyrically. It's basically, them saying, our home is an island, and for it to be evergreen, I will lay my life down. Nice sentiment, and obviously with the 70s right around the corner, environmentalism was becoming bigger and bigger, so the Turtles were sort of, catching wind of this pretty quickly. I would say if I was ranking these songs outright 1 through 12, this would probably be number 4, because it is that good, but not quite enough to beat out the other 3.
So, as tempting as it is to pull a joke here, where for some reason I've been in a very jokey mood in this episode here specifically, this is my third favorite song on the album. I'm not even gonna lie, I'm not even gonna front, and the reason why is just I didn't even really focus in on the lyrics per se. This song here, for just putting into context, taking a look, Surfer Dan could have easily been my third favorite song on the album, but whenever I revisited Earth Anthem, at the ends of me spinning the album, I was just taken away by the beauty and just what the song was bringing to the table. The splashes of the flugelhorn are fantastic, and the way that the song, in my head, focuses more on sound textures than vocals delivering lyrics. It executes that to a T. I absolutely love it. It's so beautiful, and yeah, even the vocals are just used as another instrument, in my opinion, as opposed to a means to deliver the message. I don't have any other notes in that. It's just a beautiful track, man, and I'm here for it all day.
I'm right there with you. It really is a beautiful song. Again, it is kind of ironic that a song so earnest is at the end of an album that, for the most part, is not taking itself seriously, and that this track seems to be as serious as possible. Which, again, could either be them being serious at the end or perhaps being so serious that's the biggest joke of all. That's for you, the listener, to decide. But one thing is for sure, and you know what that is, Ryan?
We did it.
We did it. We presented the Battle of the Bands, or at the very least, we presented the Turtles presenting the Battle of the Bands. I'm going to go first on this one. I love this album, man. It's just a good time. For a band to do this, for any band to have done this, particularly the Turtles, was a ballsy move for 1968, especially as with the Beatles doing what they were doing, the idea of rock becoming serious was being more and more pervasive. You know, you sort of have the beginnings of prog rock with like the Moody Blues and Pink Floyd. And so, yeah, this band just deciding, you know what, we're just going to have fun with everybody. Screw all of you who are making fun of you, and possibly ourselves as well, is such a irreverent and beautifully executed look at irreverence throughout the pop world that it is, again, just great. Now, that being said, it is not a 10 out of 10 for me, because there were a couple songs on here that were kind of on the meh side, particularly Food and Oh Daddy. They were just a little too either on the nose or nowhere near the nose at all. But front to back, again, really well executed, really strong performances throughout. And again, the fact that all these songs sound so different, yet it's by the same band, is a testament to the band's talents. So I'm going to give this an 8.5 out of 10.
Well, this is awkward. No, I'm going to stop going with that trope here. So, my overall experience, like, you know, going track to track, like, I think I listened to this album, like, you know, a total of 4 times in order to properly review it. Dude, this was another solid addition to the Matthew Durzik recommends, a band that Ryan Kearns has never really experienced before. And now, it's funny, like, you take a look at the album cover itself, and it kind of reminds me of, like, that record that you would see at, like, you know, a record store that's in the discount bin, where it's just like, oh, here's a generic looking, like, you know, album cover with, like, a couple dudes in suits. But, dude, like, I would heavily recommend anybody who comes across this album, and like any other album, where like they just take a look at a record like this and they think, oh, hey, this is kind of a generic one. Chances are it's only a couple bucks, and what's the worst thing that can happen? I mean, my brain can go down a couple different rabbit holes, which I'm going to contain to draw this review to a conclusion here in a concise manner. However, the way that the band is able to, like, you know, just, you know, employ several different styles of music really elevated the album to a different degree to me. Songs like Elenore are fantastic. I love You Showed Me and Earth Anthem, and also those songs like Surfer Dan are super solid. Everybody knows well, like, for those of you who are listening right now, you guys can know my feelings about the bottom tracks, especially the bottom of the bottom, like here, where, like, it's almost can't, it doesn't, I'll just say it doesn't land. And a couple of the tracks, like Buzzsaw and Food, it just really didn't stick the landing for me. But overall, it does paint a good, it's like a good soundtrack of the music of the 60s and like several different styles as a whole. So I'm going to land just one full step down from you. I'm going to give this album a 7.5 out of 10.
So we both give scores and a half, and yet, ironically enough, the average is out to an 8 out of 10.
Because
math.
Math works, everyone!
And as far as the next recommended album, I had a couple of avenues I was going to go down. I was half thinking about recommending Odyssey and Oracle by the Zombies, which is also a great pop album. But for full parody's sake, I'm going to go with a band that would feature in the future two members of the Turtles in Mark Volman and Howard Kalin, and that is Frank Zappa's Mothers of Invention. Also from 1968, their album We're Only In It For The Money. This is yet another romp through 60s styles, more so lyrically than musically. It's a little weirder. Actually, I'm just going to come out and say it's a lot weirder than this album. But if you're into albums that take a nice poke at the 60s and sound pretty good while they're doing it, that is the album I would recommend. We're Only In It For The Money by the Mothers of Invention.
And for my next album recommendation, I thought initially I was going to struggle with this portion here, but I think once Elenore came across my radar, like pretty earlier on in the album, and how I understood like what this album here specifically is bringing to the table and what they're trying to do, I was able to land at a pretty solid recommendation. And it's an album that I kind of hinted at earlier on, and that album is I Love You, Honey Bear by Father John Misty. And for those of you who are not familiar with Father John Misty, he is a member of the indie rock folk group called Fleet Foxes, and he does parody songs. This album here and Pure Comedy are probably his most, critically acclaimed albums. I own I Love You, Honey Bear on vinyl, and it just, that album pokes fun. It has a lot of satirical lyrics about love. I just, heavily recommend anybody checking that out, especially if you do enjoy, the parody aspect, because that's what Father John Misty does to a T, almost to perfection. And yeah, easy recommendation for me. I Love You, Honey Bear by Father John Misty.
So if you have not checked out either I Love You, Honey Bear by Father John Misty or We're Only In It For The Money by the Mothers of Invention, check those albums out if you like this one, because again, we're about having fun. And that being said, Ryan, you are up and we are heading back to the Jack White multiverse, if I'm not mistaken, right?
That is correct, good sir. So, for those of you who listened to the Metallica episode at the very end when Matt chose I gave him the options between picking the number 3 or 5. He picked 5, and that led us over to kicking off our Jack White journey with the Consolers of the Lonely review. So now we are going to be going over to the other side project of Jack White with the 2009 release by the band The Dead Weather, and that album is called Whorehound. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to checking out this album here. Save my thoughts and opinions for the next week's review, but if I had to pick an album for us to explore the group The Dead Weather, Whorehound would be my offering to you and the listener if you've not checked out anything from The Dead Weather.
I know of one song off that album. I really like it, and I'm saving that for next week. So I'm intrigued as to what the rest of the album will sound like.
And also, you listener out there, if you've not checked out Whorehound by The Dead Weather, make sure you check it out. That way, whenever you tune in next week for our discussion about it, you'll be very familiar with what the album is bringing to the table, and you're going to have your own opinions. And heck, check out this album, check out the the Raconteurs album that we reviewed in the previous episode. That way you can kind of compare, because like, at the end of our journey here, I'm gonna have a fun little exercise for me and Matt, where we're gonna be definitely racking and stacking Jack White projects based on the albums that we were reviewing, and we're gonna ultimately determine what is the best Jack White that Jack White can Jack White.
All right. Okay.
So, yeah. Do you have anything else to add about this review as a whole before we send it on out, man?
No, again, I'm glad you like the record. Again, it's a nice listen to every time I listen to it. Again, just funny, well executed, and again, nice shift from the sort of mainstream rock sound that we have been covering for the last several weeks.
Cool. So that I'm glad that I did enjoy the album as well. I'm thankful for you bringing it up, and I'm always thankful for whenever we have moments like this. So without any further ado, that does conclude this episode of Hey, Listen to This. And on behalf of me and Matt here, I want to just thank you, listener, for checking listening to this review here. And yeah, man, what's on my mind, with how things are.
What's that?
So, I don't know, it just feels like everything is falling apart. People are just freaking crazy, and it just kind of drives me insane. And you know what it makes me feel like?
A royal macadamia nut?